Now there is another concept that is class variables. Okay, here we have mentioned instance variables and class variables. So right now you see here this name age we are accessing by means of this self variable. Here also this LW we are accessing by means of this self variable. Now here we are creating object of person class with some values of name and age. We are creating another object of person class with different values of name and age here. So these variables, this name and age, are having one copy for P and one copy for T. Means for every object they are having different copies. This name and age variables, or in other words you say these members which we are accessing by using this self, these members which we are accessing by using this self variable are having different copies for different objects here. Since every object is having its own copy. Every object is having its own copy. These variables are known as an instance variables. These variables are known as an instance variables because they having their own copy per instance. Okay. So name and age, or in case of rectangle class L and W, these are just nothing but instance variables. These are instance variables. So regarding with instance variables, you can understand some things through this code what we have written. First of all, instance variables we always access by using this self variable. Next, we initialize this instance variables through this constructor or through this init method. Okay, and instance variables are having their own copy for every instance. So that are the properties of instance variables. So see what we have said here. Instance variable declared inside the constructor method of a class. They are tied to the particular object instance of the class. Hence, the contents of an instance variable are completely independent from one object instance to the other. As we have seen, this instance is having some values like John and 34, and this instance is having its own value like Rita and 56. Okay, so that is idea of instance variables. So that we already knowing it. New thing for us is a class variable. Okay, new thing for us is a class variable. Now, first thing what is said regarding with class variable is that declared inside the class definition. So obviously we are writing it inside a class, but outside any of the instance methods. Means we are not writing this variable inside any method. Means obviously we are writing somewhere here. We are writing somewhere here. Like suppose say here I'm creating one variable. Now regarding with person, suppose say I'm creating one variable like say country, or say country name. So in case of class person, we define one variable country underscore name that is not a part of any method. It is not a part of any method. So we can access this variable without using self. So this variable what we have written here is known as a class variable. Okay, this variable what we have written is a class variable. Now if you want to access this class variable anywhere, means suppose here if I want to print this class variable, okay, so as we have said regarding with instance variable we need to access it through self. But suppose if I want to print country name, now you can call this country name variable by name of a class here. We can say person dot country name, person dot country name. Okay, we'll just remove this rect class from here right now. So in simple words you can say name and age we are calling as an instance variable because it is owned by instance, and country name we are calling as a class variable because it is owned by class. We defined it inside a class outside of any method, and we even access this variable by name of a class. Okay, we access this variable by name of a class, so that's why it is known as a class variable. So if you run this, you can check here for both objects T and T we are having same value because country name is a class variable which is shared among all objects here. As we have said, instance variable is having copy for each object. Regarding with class variable, it is having only one copy which is shared by all objects here. So that is important aspect of class variable. Okay, so we can summarize all these things. See once again, instance variable declared inside the constructor method of a class, class variable declared inside the class but outside of the any instance method. Instance variable is having one copy for every instance. Class variable is having only one copy, which is accessed by all instances. So this class variable is a bit tricky one. So we'll see one scenario. Let's say we are having one class A containing one class variable name as a class var having value as a 10. Okay, so it's one scenario. One class A is there with one variable, class variable with value 10. Here we are creating object of class A, two objects in fact, one is T1, one is T2. Okay, and then what we are doing is just printing value of class variable by using name of a class. Now see, this is a class variable owned by class, expected that you should call it by name of a class, but we can even invoke this variable by name of, by object name also, means by instance variable also. Okay, so see what we have done here. One class is there with one class variable having value 10, two objects T1, T2. First we are printing this value of class variable by invoking name of a class, and then we are trying to print same value by invoking through instances T1 and T2. So what happens, it is just printing every time as a 10. So bottom line is that we can access this variable by instance also. Okay, next we make change in this value saying 20. So what happens, it is 20 everywhere, that's fine. Now what we are doing, we are just changing this value through T1 now instead of A. For this instance we are changing value as a 20. Now if you see, value of 20 is only applicable for this instance only. Okay, now this is one working as a conflicting, because we said that this is a variable which is shared by all instances. This variable is shared by all instances, but when you change value of this variable by calling this variable by name of instance, it is not applying to all instances here. So what we can summarize is like this: if class variable accessed by class name, it will override the value for all instances. But if class variable is accessed by instance name, it will override value for only that instance. Means if you change the value of class variable by instance name, it will only applicable for that instance. And if you change it by class name, it will applicable for all instances here. So while using class variables, we need to understand this aspect of class variable. Class attributes are tricky as we have seen right now. So we'll see some cases where this class variable becomes handy. The first case is to store constants. Means if you want to define any constant which you want to use in a class, so instead of creating it as an instance variable, it is always better to define it as a class variable. Okay, so what we have said here, as a class attributes can be accessed as attributes of the class itself. It's often nice to use them for storing class-wide or class-specific constants. So see here an example of we can define constants as a class variable. Here we are having one class circle. Now we want to define one constant, that is pi. We can define it as a class variable like this one. Then we are writing one init method. We initialize the radius value to this init method. Like this one, and then we are writing one area method to calculate area. We'll print it here. Okay, so this time we can use this pi variable like this. See, circle dot pi into self dot r into self dot r. Okay, so this is how we can define one constant pi as a class variable here. Okay, so we'll not execute this code, it is self-explainable. Important thing is that this constant, pi constant, we are defining as a class variable. So this is one use of a class variable to store constants. Second use, defining default values. Defining default values. Now see here, we'll go with this example. As a trivial example, we might create a bounded list, that is a list that can only hold a certain number of elements or fewer, and choose to have a default cap of 10 items. Means suppose if your class contains a list where you want to, suppose your class contains a list, bounded list, okay, means where number of elements are maximally 10. So this limit you can define as a class variable. This limit you can define as a class variable. See here, suppose we are having one class, like suppose same name of a class is a my class. Now here we are defining limit. The limit is equal to 10. So this is a class variable. This limit variable is a class variable. Now this class contains one list that we can initialize by using this init method, self dot data is equal to empty list. Initially we are defining it as a empty list. Now we can add elements to this list by calling method add. And see, while adding this element to list, here we are checking limit of list here. So here by calling this len function, we can check self dot data len is smaller than my class dot limit. Then we will add this element to list here. So here we can say self dot data dot append, pass one data value here d, that we are appending to list, else we are printing one message, list is full. This is one another use of class variable. This is one other use of class variable. Suppose if you want to define some limits on your collections, we can define it as a class variable, and we can use while adding elements to check whether this list is within limit or not. Okay. And one another situation where we can use this class variable is a tracking all data across all instances of a given class. Okay, to track all data across all instances of a given class. This is a sort of a specific but a kind of scenario in which you might want to access a piece of data related to every existing instance of a class. And see here, suppose we'll go with one person class again. Now this class contains one name variable, name member like previous one, and that we are initializing by using constructor once again. Okay, so here we are initializing it by saying self.name is equal to n. Now see, here we are creating one variable, one list which will store all names. We are creating one list which always store all names related to person. Okay, so here after assigning this name to this instance variable, what we are doing, we are calling this all names collection, and we are adding this name to this collection also. So every person is having its own name. With that, we are having one collection which is shared by all objects, and this collection contains all the names available in your list, or available with objects here. Okay, so these are some situations in which we can use class variables instead of instance variables. Okay, like for storage of constant, or defining some default values, for tracking a data which you want to tracking all data across all instances of a given class here. Okay, so that's all regarding with class variables.